Hello and welcome to Buy Africa, the show where we focus on investment opportunities around the continent. I'm Tapo Mudiba, and thanks for joining me. Tonight, I'm joined by Maurice Madiba, founding director at Cloud Atlas Investing. Maurice, thank you for joining us.
That's cool.
I was just having a quick chuckle there. I'm pretty sure people will confuse our surnames, but that's fine. Let's jump into our favorite discussion, the continent.
Yeah.
Let's start out with the giant, Nigeria. Where are we currently in terms of monetary policy? What's happening with the currency? We spend quite a bit of time talking about the Naira. What are your views on the current discussions?
Yeah, so I think with one of the things with the central bank, what we've noticed is there's been a lot of pressure for them to devalue the Naira. And now that pressure is being supported by quite credible data points, such as the inflation rising to 13%.
Right.
And so now what they're looking to do is to introduce a floating exchange regime, which would probably see a two-tier exchange market,
Right.
whereby the interbanks would get a floating rate and then strategic projects would get a fixed rate of the Naira to the dollar. Right. So, you know, what that could translate to is you could have almost what you would call a subsidy, if I can put it in inverted commas, of the currency for these strategic projects. If you look at some of the black market trading or, you know, the parallel market trading of the Naira, it's trading at about 357 to the dollar.
Compared to the peg at what,
yeah,
198?
Yeah, 198, 199.
Yeah.
So what that could translate to is quite a huge devaluation of close to about 80%,
Right.
which could then affect the price of food, the price of a lot of things in Nigeria. So it's going to be interesting to see what details they come out with from this new introduction.
I guess one of the key issues is that we now afforded the ability to speculate. The original announcement said that within a couple of days they'll give clarification. Do we have a sense as to when we're going to get clarification on it?
Yeah, so at the moment they are in Europe, and they're also discussing with a lot of market participants.
Right.
So they've taken quite a good approach in that they want to get a lot of market feedback about how do they introduce this new FX regime, which I think is a good way to do it. But what you have seen, though, for us, as you mentioned, we can speculate. When the announcement came out, the equity markets did rise quite a bit. And then when they said they're going to delay the announcement of the details, you saw a flight of capital out of the equity markets.
Right.
So people are almost hoarding cash, not knowing exactly what to do with it because there is no definitive clarity. So the quicker they can respond to these new market pressures, the better it would be for the economy.
Okay. Let's shift focus. Let's talk Kenya in terms of monetary policy, and then start talking about the underlying economy and the stock market.
Yeah. So Kenya is an interesting place. You know, they are growing pretty well. I think they pushed 6% so far this year.
Yep.
And that's pretty strong growth across anywhere in the world at this particular point in time. They've also taken advantage of this environment by cutting their interest rates by 100 basis points, which is good, and affording people the ability to have more disposable income. The funny thing is that all of this growth that's happened on a macroeconomic level has not translated into the stock exchange, which is actually Kenyan companies have had poor performances in this past earnings season. And the stock market hasn't grown as much as it should have, you know, given the positivity of the general country.
Which is a very strange phenomenon. The central bank, are they doing anything to try and, keep growth going?
I think one of the things is there's a lot of factors that are affecting why the market hasn't done so well. A lot of people can look to the risk on, risk off, and the global environment as it is at the moment.
Right.
But what the Kenyan authorities are looking at doing, or what they need to really quicken in terms of approving, is innovative technologies, such as this new Mabika or M-Abika, which is a trading version of M-Pesa,
Right.
whereby people can trade government bonds using their mobile phone. And they don't.
Which is quite exciting,
Yeah.
In terms of retail investments.
Exactly, and it also allows them to then issue local currency denominated bonds, and have that local investor appetite, then feeding their growth, which I think we need to see a lot of in Africa. It will definitely strengthen the shilling in that they no longer have to worry about quite a fluctuating exchange rate against the dollar and against other world major currencies, which is the same problem they faced about a year ago when the central bank started to intervene and issued a lot of reverse repos and what have you at that point in time. So that would be one of the things that would shift the capital of their markets from the foreign hands into domestic hands, while still allowing for quite a nice element of foreign ownership.
And incorporating a strong element of technology,
That's
pretty
right.
much leading the way.
That's right, because the next phase for Africa is digitization.
Right.
So digitizing services and what have you is where Africa is going to move towards. And I think our Silicon Valley is going to be definitely East Africa,
Yeah.
Kenya,
Seemingly so.
yeah, Kenya and Rwanda, and the World Economic Forum also placed a lot of emphasis on digitization.
Right.
So if that takes place, then having these type of apps and these type of applications is going to be the way forward.
Right. Let's hope it does take off. As you touched on, it alleviates a lot of the issues surrounding funding right now. Let's talk a little bit about other sectors. Food. How are food retailers and food producers doing in this current environment?
Yeah, so food is being largely impacted by the drought that's taken place, which has affected a lot of food producers on the continent. But that effect, that increase in prices is really being passed on to the consumer. So you're finding that inflation is really driven up in a lot of these African markets by the price of food. The nice thing about it, though, is that the food retailers have done well across the continent.
Right.
Somehow finding a way to pass on these costs has allowed them to produce a little bit better earnings, which then you've seen their share prices go up double digit year to date. A lot of them across the continent, North Africa and Morocco, Nigeria, you've also seen a lot of good food producers. And then in Kenya, again, they've had a poor result season, which is an unexplained phenomenon at this point in time. But around the rest of the continent, food and beverage is done exceptionally well.
So really, this is a theme that you'd imagine in the current environment is doing well, but also given the dynamics of the continent, would you say it's likely to do well going forward?
Yeah, it is something that is a growth sector, because as we do mention that the African consumer is going to be quite a critical focus for African governments and for the Africa's growth story. So that's going to be driven a lot by food and beverage. You have the increasing urbanization. You have small farmers becoming a lot smarter and food producers becoming a lot smarter in terms of adopting technology in their processes. So you can buy seeds online, you can monitor rainfall online, and a lot of these good innovations that are harnessing the power of technology, which then reduces a lot of costs, increases the ability to have better yields, whether the soil is rich or not. But I think that will definitely, you'll see a lot of growth in production and a lot of growth in consumption.
And potentially alleviates quite a bit of the wastage that's been happening within the sector on the continent.
That's right, yeah. And there's another thing with wastage is that there's not a lot of storage facilities in Africa.
Yep.
So it's a huge opportunity right now for your private equity firms and to look at these projects that can store food across the continent, because food security is one of the key features of Africa's growth going forward. But Africa is quite a rich place, and it's a very diverse place. But if we're unable to store our food sources, then we're always going to be wasting. And then when we have a drought like this, we really feel the effect.
Yeah. Okay. Moving on to other sectors. Any other sectors that in this current environment are catching your eye?
A few of to be honest, I think Buy Africa is my stock recommendation.
In general,
Yeah.
I like that. Can we get a strong recording of that?
Yeah. The banks across the continent, Pan-African banks, have done exceptionally well.
Right.
So you've seen their numbers do better than some of the other sectors.
So anybody who's got a truly continental approach in terms of the different regions is doing well?
Yeah, it's doing well. So United Bank of Africa in 20 different African countries is up over 60% year to date. You've got Attijari Wafa, which is a Moroccan bank, and they're looking to expand not only into other African regions, but also internationally just to service their citizens. So opening offices in North America, And that's going to be quite positive.
Is that really
growth.
looking to touch base on expats who have moved to North America?
That's right, and service their citizens. I think one of the things that's nice about that is, you know, we've got quite a large African diaspora, if you can think about it, but a lot of them are not serviced by African banks.
Right.
So if African banks are taking this type of approach, then, you know, they really have an untapped growth market.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. So in spite of, I guess, the soft patch economically, you'd say actually some of the regional banks, or not the regional, but the ones that are looking across the continent, they're doing well. Is there scope that if the current economic soft patch continues, that banks potentially is not where you want to be?
Yeah, it's always interesting because banks should be seen as a defensive stock. And this is where the interventions of like increasing interest rates and having good monetary policy, the intervention of central banks plays quite a big role. Because they are able to then monitor, you know, what is the non-performing loans and impose these type of restrictions on banks, which could see their performance and management of risk improve significantly. So I think it's always good to have a bit of banks in your portfolio, though not to be overexposed, because you might miss out on other growth sectors like healthcare. I'm sure there's been a lot of talk that healthcare is the next focus for governments, and digitizing the healthcare sector is going to be quite important. So you'll see some healthcare stocks doing exceptionally well, but you should always have a bit of banks because banks service most of the population.
You touched on a very important theme, and maybe one we don't actually highlight enough. Are banks becoming a better investment given better regulation and governance on the continent?
The regulation certainly changed quite a bit, and it's being a bit choppy, but it has helped sort of stabilize the banking sector across the continent. And this regulation, as you start to hear now, the voice of the regulator across Africa has been lifted quite significantly.
Right.
So, and then the regulators are now winning public confidence. Because if the regulators are pushing towards reforms in particular sectors, the public says, okay, well, now I agree with this, and then I understand that these banks are regulated by the regulator. It's more likely that you'd open accounts as opposed to keeping money under the mattress. You transact more electronically as opposed to cash carrying quite a bit of the time. So I do think that the voice of the regulator certainly helps shape the sector and is going to help shape it in the future and promote that governance.
Perfect. Let's leave it there. You heard it right on the show. You need to buy Africa. Thanks to my guest, Maurice Madiba, founding director of Cloud Atlas Investing. That's all from Buy Africa this week. Remember to follow me on Twitter. That's @Madiba_Tsapo. And send us your thoughts about the show using the hashtag BuyAfrica. From myself and the team, goodbye.